Hello and welcome to our episode 6 discussion of House of the Dragon. We are in the final stretch here towards coming up on the end of the season. I actually just watched the episode this morning, so I have like no notes on it. But I really
Yeah.
enjoyed it. What did you think of it?
I feel like it's going back to how Game of Thrones was a little bit.
Mhm.
Like, it's not as good as the last episode, but it still feels like it's very much like where Game of Thrones was. You
Yes.
know, like going back to like how, the small scenes really have an impact on like the bigger elements. It's what
Mhm.
I quite like.
It definitely felt like there was a lot of moving parts and that there's like a lot of things that are happening in this episode that are going to be major later on, and I really
Yeah.
enjoyed that.
Oh yeah, you can definitely feel like the tension that it's building for the audience. Like, you know, to probably what I imagine will be like a massive finale.
Mhm. I'm excited.
Yeah. And I'm kind of like, are we going to get a Damon and Aemond fight next episode or the episode after? I'm a bit like not quite sure where we're going with that, but
We
who knows?
might because they are leading up to, um, Aemon might go to Harrenhal. You know, the Aemon definitely wants his armies to march on Harrenhal,
Yeah.
and, so, I mean, I think we are maybe leading up to that. I don't know if it's gonna be next episode because it might be in the final episode? I'm not sure.
I know, but to me, I'm kind of like I understand why you're building up to this, but I'm like I kind of like a more of a better ending episode than just a fight between Aemond and Damon on dragons. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, that's fair. I don't know
Like,
either, like, how long. Because I feel like some things like, oh, I expect, oh, now that this happened, we're gonna get like, more battle scenes or whatever. And I feel like they are very much taking their slow time in this. So that's why I'm just like, I'm not sure if it's gonna be next episode, but at the same time, yeah, Damon hasn't been like, I'm gonna say a main antagonist to Aemond this episode or this season. So I'm not
no,
sure. Like, you're right, that might not be as satisfying.
no, and I mean there was some stuff that was said like obviously in first season between them, but Aemond would be one that would like hold a grudge enough. Damon would just be a little bit like blasé about it, but
Yeah. We are getting other dragon riders though, and I feel like they are going to play into the final
yes.
for sure.
I think they are. So I think you're probably right. I think next episode is going to be Damon and Vega, and my prediction is Damon's going to die, and so's Caraxes.
You
I've
might
got,
be right.
but I've a feeling they'll wound Vega, so he won't be dead. But I've a feeling they'll probably wound Vega. Because it just seems a little bit repetitive if Vega fights the dragon, then kills the dragon and the rider at the same time again. They kind of got to do it a different way, in my
Mhm.
opinion, to feel like it kind of make it work. Um, so that's what I think will happen. And then I think the next episode will probably be Rhaenyra will be moving her dragons on the board to take on Vega, possibly.
Yeah. Well, and particularly if Vhagar has already been wounded in battle or something like that,
Mm,
it would be even easier to take Vhagar on.
yeah,
And like we
I
were
mean,
discussing before, how
yeah,
how do you actually take on a dragon that's like as big and powerful? And I think there are ways, and I'm interested
yeah,
in seeing that.
yeah. And I mean, they've already laid the foundation for Vhagar and what Rhaenyra kind of wants to do. From the previous episode where her and Jace were talking about Vhagar and how
Hmm.
Rhaenyra is like, I need more dragons. So that's kind of so it's already sort of laid. So I'm kind of hoping that it's kind of how it's going to end. But it will be curious because I've just got to the point in the book where I'm just starting where season 1 of the House of the Dragon in the book. So I'm
Nice.
like, I'm so close to printing out. And I'm like, I have so many other books. I've got arcs I have to read and stuff, and like the about to like, and I'm like, no, I just want to read Fire and Blood. So, should we just talk about Damon?
Yeah, let's talk about Damon.
What I want to know what you think about the scenes of Damon.
Okay, so I have been enjoying most of the Harrenhal stuff, and I've been enjoying, like, and I enjoyed his visions this time, but I will say, what is this, like, the 4th episode where we're just doing the same thing with Damon? I
Yeah.
do understand, and, like, even this episode, I was going like, "Okay, are we gonna do anything more? Are we going to, like, move on? Because 'Cause we're just, like, basically still torturing Damon with visions." And
Mm.
I don't feel like we really moved past that this episode, and I was thinking too, like, in Game of Thrones, we had entire episodes where we did not see certain characters. And they could have done that with Damon. We could have seen, like, some of his visions, and then we, like, had a couple episodes where Damon was not included, and then we catch up with Damon again where whatever he's gonna do, and that would have taken away some of the just the repetitiveness. 'Cause
Yeah.
I enjoyed watching it, but I do agree, like, we're not progressing in Damon's arc. We're just doing the same thing.
It feels very stagnant, which is where I was kind of at. Like, it came on, and I went, "Oh, for fuck's sake, not again!" Literally, because I was like, "What?" And then obviously you get Alice, and like I liked that scene with them before the Weirdwood,
Mhm.
where yeah, that was I really liked that. But the whole vision thing and him obviously threatening, obviously the steward, and the steward being like, it's fine. And then people, like he's everybody else kind of looking at him, saying like he is kind of losing his mind a little bit, and like they got the revelation that one of I think it was the Tully Lord is now dead, so the son's now ruling, and the son will be more manipulative. You can manipulate him more. So it was like Damon, that would be a really good choice for Damon to fly over there straight away on his dragon, slight threat there, and be like, look, fight for me, we'll work something out. And they probably go, oh yes, because he's a new lord. People want to know what they're going to do. So yeah. So, but he didn't, and it was just like the same again and again and again, and I'm just a little bit fed up with it. And it better come to a really good resolution, or I'm going to be really sour.
I mean, I think Damon is probably going to contact the young Tully Lord now that we know the older one is dead. Well, he already had that. He came that was the young one he had come to Harrenhal earlier
Yeah.
this season. What I think is really interesting about that scene is we now have confirmation Alice Rivers is not a ghost because
Oh yeah,
this
yeah.
the strong guy, whatever his name is, said that, uh, Alice Rivers went to offer her help and, they could not heal the older Tully guy, and I was like, "Well, Alice Rivers killed him, obviously."
Oh
But,
yeah, yeah. Everybody
uh,
else
al
knows because she's playing the game. Yeah.
yeah, but also she's not a ghost. Other people in Harrenhal know that she's there. So,
Oh yeah. I never thought she was, but I can see your reasoning a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I don't know quite know where it's going to go. I'm hoping when Damon, if he ends up leaving Harrenhal, I don't know if he will. I don't know if Aemond will come to Harrenhal to him, and that's when they'll have their fight. I don't quite know how that's going to play on him and his skills and stuff like that.
I mean, I
So
feel like
that'd
they're
be
setting
interesting.
stuff up with the Tullys, even having the young boy there earlier in the season. I feel like something has to happen there, but it doesn't necessarily have to be with Damon. It could just be someone else on Rhaenyra's side going and talking to them. Like, I'm not
Mm.
sure, but, like, I feel like they're setting up something that is going to be important later.
I do hope so, but I do wonder if they're just insinuating these little things so it's showing everybody else that they're maneuvering people on the board a little bit. But I mean, who knows? We'll have to wait and see and hope it's actually going to end up being worth suffering for it. To be fair,
Okay,
because I have
well,
had enough.
what did you think of the Damon and, Viserys scene with, Viserys's, uh, deceased wife? Like, that he was
So
crying over her and all of that. Because, like,
yeah,
honestly, the first scene between Daemon and Viserys where it's very similar to a scene in season 1 where Viserys is sending Daemon away and saying, "I'm going to name Rhaenyra queen," and we've already, like, had that type of scene with, like, Daemon tr just struggling with the fact that Rhaenyra is the heir in Harrenhal. But I thought the scene with, like, Viserys and Daemon, and Viserys mourning his wife was, like, actually playing on a little bit of a different side of Damon, and, like, maybe Damon is, like, sorry that he was not there for the funeral or that he was not there for Viserys more or something.
I took it more as of his deep affection for his brother, because I think that was the only reason why he didn't take the throne. Because he
That's
probably
fair.
could have. So, you know, and I just look at it as sort of like a build up of, you know, it's playing on his mind a lot, playing on, you know, he doesn't deal with grief very well. I mean, you look at what happened to his son, you know, how he dealt with Rhaenyra. Like, Rhaenyra was dealing with it and he just left. Like,
Mhm.
like, I'm just going to rule, we're going to attack. He doesn't really deal with it very well. So I just kind of took it as more of that coming back up a little bit and him like
Yeah,
trying to deal with it. And then obviously he wanted to leave because he was like, I don't want to see any of this. And then obviously the doors were locked and stuff. And you know, there's a lot of like bad emotions, should I say, between Viserys and Daemon. But
mhm.
you know, I don't particularly think Viserys was a good king. So there's that.
I find, I guess the scenes maybe between Viserys and Daemon a little bit more interesting than, like, some of the scenes, like, we've had between Daemon and Rhaenyra or Daemon and
Mm.
his mom or all of that. Like, I felt like this was maybe more to the point than those scenes.
Yeah, and I think that's because we obviously could see the descent between the two brothers in season one. But
Mhm.
we could also see there's all sorts of stuff going on. So stuff they layered in like season one. So when you see something like this, you get more of an impact through it. So that's kind of how I took that, to be fair. But it was I was just a bit sort of fed up with it by that point, to be fair.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, we are pretty much just doing the same thing with Daemon, so
Yeah, pretty much doing the same thing. Um, but I did really like Alison in this episode.
Mhm.
I thought, you know, being cast aside by her own son is a blow. But then the
Mhm.
scene with her brother, I really enjoyed that, and I was
I love that
surprised, and
scene.
I was
Mhm.
yeah, because obviously to me she seems a little bit kind of like grasping at straws a little bit because she's been cast aside, and she's like, now what do I do? Because Aemond Cameron, he's
Mhm.
perfectly capable of doing all of this. She's got one son who's dying, although he might survive at this point, and then another son who doesn't really know his mother because he was sent to Old Town.
Mhm.
So there's that going, and it's kind of like, well, so I can kind of, you know, see, you know, she's probably going through a lot of things emotionally, and she's just kind of
Oh,
like,
yeah.
oh. But yeah, the scene between her and her brother, just how quiet it was as well.
Oh,
That's,
absolutely.
that's what I
I
like.
think that was my favorite Alicent scene this episode, and I feel like it also shed a lot of light into, Alice's state of mind at this point because,
Mm,
she says, like, at the end of the scene, Alicent's brother says, "Oh, maybe being raised in the Red Keep is, like, a bad influence on the sons," or something like
yeah.
that, and she said, like, "Is it the Red's Keep or is it their mother?" And I thought that was, like, really telling of where Alicent is at this point because she feels like she's failed her sons.
I would, yeah, but I'd also kind of agree that she had, because I mean, she did kind of raise them, you know, especially with everything that's kind of gone on. I'm kind of like, well, it is kind of your fault. So, you know, I'm always kind of sort of like, people, kids who get raised, they take influence from those around them. And I know it's a lot harder in those times because you have so many people going, this is how it is, this is how everything's right. But she did do right by Helena. So
Mhm.
there's that side of it as well. So she's, you know, considering everything else is probably going on, she did fine. I still don't think she did great raising the two sons, but, you know, I think that's what it is.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think there is I think particularly for Aemond and Aegon, that Alicent couldn't have done it all herself. Like, they had significant influences outside of Alicent being raised in the palace, being raised around Rhaenyra's kids, and, like, everything that it involves, being raised as, like, the heirs, you know? So
Yeah.
there's so many influences on them, I don't think it's fully Alicent's. fault either
No,
way.
but
Like,
yeah, but
I
then there's
just
also
I
the case. Go on, finish.
well, I just think it's, like, an interesting view into her psyche or her thought process at this point of just, like, feeling like a failure and feeling like she failed as a mother.
Yeah, yeah, there's definitely that. There's also the fact that I think she's obviously feeling as if her children don't love her enough as she does them, which is probably very prevalent through the history, through the world. You know, women are always looked down upon, that kind of stuff. Um, but I also, looking back, Alison was probably very alone when she was raising her children
Mhm.
because she didn't have Rhaenyra anymore. Then she didn't have, she was the queen, but she didn't really have any allies at court. Her father was forcing her to, saying like bringing her there to like marry Viserys, and saying do all of this, like manipulate her a little bit. So there is that going. But what interests me talking about Otto is I think he's planning something
Something's going on with him for sure.
because he's not written to either of his children.
Uh-huh.
Which and like you wouldn't really mention that unless it was going to mean something, because like that's what I kind of think this show's going to do. It's going to mention a few offhand lines where we just wouldn't think anything about it, and then it would reveal to become something. So I do wonder, because her other son does have a dragon. So I
Oh,
do wonder if Otto's trying to maneuver him into the game board somehow. How? I don't know. Would
that's
also be
interesting.
gaining allies as well and
Uh-huh.
stuff like that.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So,
I didn't think of her other son having a dragon. He could definitely become a player.
because
And
what I
just the fact that they even talked about the son too, like, he's probably gonna come up later, but like I said, it could have also just been more of
yeah, but
revealing Allison's
I
internal
yeah, but
life.
I do remember Otto saying to Alicent to write to her other son and ask him to come here to come to King's Landing. But
Mhm.
obviously, he has a dragon, so that's layered that there. So I'm kind of like that's where I kind of think this is going, because when you look at the grand scheme of everything, the everything is kind of being played around dragons. So like you get the Lannisters who are going, yeah, I'll go, but I'm not going to go. Well, but Aemond has got to come there on Vhagar when we
Mhm.
attack, because they're like, they know what dragons are capable of. They know what Daemon's capable of. He's got a dragon. At this point, they probably still think, he's with Rhaenyra, but obviously Rhaenyra isn't there. So they're like, well, could they have more dragons? So it makes sense to bring, Aemond with Vhagar.
Yeah.
Which is also interesting enough that people are kind of agreeing to send Aemond on Vhagar when they didn't want to agree to send Aegon. So I'm kind of like, they've obviously got more faith in Aemond than they did in Aegon.
I also think it's 'cause that's a good point, but Aegon is still alive, like, Aemond is just ruling as regent. He is not the Soul King. That's a good point, though, because, like, Aegon's fate is unknown. We don't know that he's going to survive this.
Yeah. I think he will because of what, oh, is it Laris said to him? Which really, see, this is what I love about George R. R. Martin, right? Is he writes these characters and then he takes something away from them and goes, well, who are you now? Like Bran without his legs. Then you have, Aegon, who's, going to be crippled probably all his life, and all you've got is your brains. So he's not, they're changing and they're growing. They're like, obviously, they can't ride the dragon anymore. They can't do all of this stuff. But it's like, well, you have your mind, train it, and be really good. Like you look at Littlefinger in Game of Thrones. I know he was always pushed down, which it's a continual character thing he does, and I just love the shits out of it because now I really want Aegon to survive, and I really want him to sort of use his like brain to will react, because obviously Aemond will probably be like, well, I'm going to be like king in all but name, and that's kind of what he is at the moment, and
Yeah.
also threatening Aegon as well in the chamber, which
Oh, yeah.
was expected. I mean, we all knew that was going to happen. Although I did kind of cringe when he was shoving the little ball thing into his wounds. I was like, no, no, no. That was a bit, ugh.
Well, I think all of the scenes with Aegon in it were so good this episode. And like even you said about like Allison and her brother, how it was more like a quiet scene. I feel like we had some really great, just these like, quiet scenes in the
Mm.
episode. And Aegon, all of the scenes with Aegon, I feel like were like that. And I agree with you that I really hope Aegon really just decides to, and maybe he'll learn more like battle strategy or things that make him, because people kind of ignored him as a ruler previously, and
Mm.
I kind of hope that he gains something more, that he's like able to be respected as like a, I don't know exactly where he's going to take his knowledge, but I think
Yeah.
it would be interesting to see. And I loved his scene with Laris, because and Laris coming and saying like even the whole thing of like people aren't going to take you seriously, so like you have to earn it now, kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's definitely a message that you even see in society today, like with disabled people. You know, like it happens. They just don't care. They don't even see you. So you have to make people see you, and you have to try
Hmm.
extra hard, and then you have to do all of this, which really shows like the strength of a character. And that's what I like. This is why I like seeing disabled representation in media, because it everything just can't be handled on a platter. You have to try a lot harder. And this is what I like. That's what I really want them to do with Aegon, is really show him, recovering, like learning a bit more, doing like kind of a little bit what Tyrion Lannister did, but
Hmm.
slightly kind of different in the case of like, oh, he's going to be book smart and he's going to be clever, but at what kind of cost? How is he going to struggle? Like, I'm pretty sure Helena will stay with him the whole time because she just seems that kind of character.
Oh yeah.
But it's kind of, the whole realm focuses on strength and people being strong. That, that's how you get to become king. That's how you get to do anything, is, through strength. And then Aegon doesn't have that anymore. So, it'd be interesting where he's going to stand, what he'll end up doing
Hmm.
with it. Um, it kind of depends. He might end up saying, "I'll take up a mace's chain or something just to get away from his brother." To be
Yeah.
fair, which you can kind of see it, but at the same time, I'd be a little bit disappointed. But
Yeah. Speaking of which, we have scenes with several people and Aegon, but we do not have a scene with Helena and Aegon. And I don't think we've had a scene with Helena and Aegon since Aegon's return from battle. I feel like Helena is very much just fading into the background, and I'm kind of sad that they're not using her character more.
so I kind of disagree because I watched a recap of season one and she mentioned Aemond saying he would get a dragon, but you'd have to close an eye, and then it happened. So she's
Mhm.
obviously got that kind of dream power thing going on, as you said. And then the first scene we see with her, she's like, one of my grasshoppers isn't talking, like isn't squeaking
I think it was a
anymore.
bird, wasn't it? Or
Yeah,
was it
it
a
was some.
grasshopper? Yeah, something, it's not
It
making
was
noise anymore.
something.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, well, what are you alluding to? Because I might have to go back and rewatch it and kind of see, do we hear it, or is she just saying that as being? Because she's done that throughout this season. She's laying very cryptic messages like, "I forgive you," or "Was it worth it?" And it's
Mhm.
like, well, we're not quite sure what she's leading up to yet. So I have a feeling they're laying the foundation with her for this season, and then maybe next season she might get more of a role and might kind of hint at what is to kind of come a little bit more. But again, it all does depend. But I do
Yeah.
think she is fading into the background a little bit because again, you get the mob scene between her and Alison. Which, to be fair, the dumbest thing ever is to say you need to leave. No, you just board up and sept and just don't let anybody else in until everybody disappears because you've got stone walls and a
Mhm.
door that people cannot bash through.
Mhm. I was thinking the same
I
thing
was like,
of
what
like,
are you
"Wait a
doing?
minute, these seemed like they were fine in there, so we're gonna go out to where the crowd is."
Yeah, it just seemed just stupid. But I'm curious to see because obviously Alison got cut, and then like we zoom into the cut, she's like, oh, I think that must have to, like it's either a symbolism for something or it's going to mean something.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see where that is going to go. But yeah, it was so stupid just to leave the sept. And I was like,
Mhm.
okay. But I understand why the mob are mobbing. And I thought the idea of Rhaenyra sending food was clever.
I loved that whenever I saw the ship or the little boat and in the
Yeah.
I was like, "That is brilliant."
Yeah.
And how it has Rhaenyra's flag on it,
Yeah.
and then there was, like, multiple ships. Because
Yeah.
particularly when it's just one, you're like, "Well" I mean, and then people are gonna fight over the food and all of that, which did happen,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
yeah.
but I mean, she's turning the common folk against the king, or like
Mhm,
Aegon, and that is a clever maneuver because they'll be more willing to want to help Rhaenyra in the long term, and they'll be more willing to sort of praise her up when obviously if she is saying and it ends up winning or gets the throne or wants something on East King's Landing, they'll be like, let Rhaenyra in because obviously she would give us food. Because you
mhm,
already see them like complaining about how Viserys would never eat and feast if his common folk didn't have food. So, but Aemond is just doing it because Aemond just doesn't care. He's just one of those ones that he just doesn't really care about the common folk as much. He's clever and he knows how to, do battle and maneuver and strategy, but common folk, he doesn't really care.
mhm.
But I am hoping, though, that the want to say the bastard Targaryen is going to come into play because I generally thought he was going to be the one who's going to take the dragon,
Same. Well,
and then
we
they
have
didn't.
more than one
We
dragon.
do have more, so I'm kind of hoping, like, because we're seeing more scenes, and he seemed to be having more of an impact through each episode, like a little bit longer with him, especially with his daughter, and then struggling. So I'm hoping, I was really hoping he was going to go. Well, let's go to Dragonstone, and then obviously he can say to Rhaenyra, "I am the bastard son of such and such." Rhaenyra will go, "Great, come take a dragon." It would be a little bit too like straightforward, but that's kind of what I was hoping it was going to happen, and then it didn't. But it did surprise me. It was one of Corlys's bastards, though,
Yes.
and I thought it was going to be the bald guy. He was trying to hide that he's a Targaryen, but it wasn't. It was alluding to be the other one. Whether we don't really
Yeah.
know for sure, but it was alluding to be the other one, and I love that. And I literally went, "You're going to end it there," and it did. And I went, "Why?" Because I really want to see it because it's such a good idea, and I love the fact that I think Seafire or something. The
Sea
dragon just got
smoke.
pissed off. Sea smoke got pissed off about them trying to present such a weak ass guy. I knew he was going to fail because I was like, "You're too weak. You don't have enough blood of the dragon in you. You're not brave enough. I literally went. It was fine. He went to step up to the dragon and he hesitated. I went, no, it's like, I'm not going to take you because
Yeah.
if you do it with any sort of wild animal, with horses or anything, you hesitate. All of a sudden, they're like, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" Whereas if you're assertive and just confident, they're just like, "Oh, okay." And I'm imagining it's going to be the same with dragons. I'm
Yeah.
just thinking that I can't say that for sure. So I just knew it wasn't going to work. But then the dragon being so pissed off and fucking off is interesting. And
Well,
then
even them telling him don't show fear, I feel like feeds into that, like, that's where they're going with
it's
these.
it's so hard because a lot of time with horses they can sense your emotions. So if you're nervous or fearful, they will sense it. And when you hear people say, "Well, try not to feel any of this," it's really hard. Sometimes when you're doing something like you're absolutely shitting yourself. So I totally get it because a dragon is again far more dangerous, and you could die, and he did
Mhm,
die
mhm.
in the worst way possible. So I do kind of see it, but I could just kind of see it was going to fail from the start. But it did end up working in their favor from
Yes.
them, because I loved that chase scene. Because to
Mhm,
me, I don't know, it came across like the dragon chose the rider, as if
mhm.
like I'm going to hunt you down, and oh, that's where the rider was. So rather than he was actually hunting to kill anything, because
Yes.
it didn't breathe fire or anything. It didn't try and attack when it could have
Yeah.
done. And that's kind of how it came across. And I thought that was really interesting.
Well, and it definitely seemed like he picked that person out, like, of the people on the beach. He was
Yeah,
very much, like, targeting that person.
yeah,
So, I feel like it did come across as, like, the dragon went, "I'm gonna find my own rider."
yeah. Which usually is how I think it kind of goes with dragons because you get we're going to move over to the Eerie at the moment. I cannot remember her. I think she's Renee, or something similar to Rhaenys, but
Reina. I think it's
Yeah,
Raina.
yeah, Raina, who tried to take a dragon and it didn't. She went to the dragon pit and it didn't work. And she seems like a very, so, and she is like Targaryen as well. So you kind of see, like, the dragon does kind of choose a little bit. It kind of goes, I'll take it, and then they'll be loyal for a while,
Mhm.
for however long, and then somebody else comes to take the dragon again. But going back to the veil, I really want to know what the wild dragon is.
I want to know if Raina's gonna ride the wild dragon.
I kind of want that to happen, but
Uh-huh.
from what I've heard from watching some other people do videos on the episode, is apparently there should be another character that should come up with it. But I'm kind of hoping they are going to scratch that character out and then go with she takes the wild dragon,
Mhm.
because she's slowly coming into herself a little bit. We've not had many scenes with her, but you can see how she's trying to be a lot stronger and a lot older than she is, because she's not actually that old when you think about it.
Oh yeah.
So I'm hoping with her going away and looking after these kids and standing up to Lady Aaron, she is starting to kind of come into herself, and then the wild dragon will go, okay, yeah, sure, I will
I
take you.
do I do think there are showing in this episode that like dragons prefer people who have like who display some sort of boldness or some sort of fire. And I think that they're probably going to show that more with like who they get to ride the other dragons and all of that. So it does make me kind of wonder like how long we're going to take for Reyna to get a dragon if she gets a dragon. So I feel like I understand why
Yeah.
she hasn't had one up to this point. But I just yeah, I want her to take that step and get to,
Yeah.
bond with the wild dragon.
Yeah. I mean, I am a sucker for like an underdog story, and she feels like the written to a T to be that, because she wants to stay and help, and yet she's been denied because one, she doesn't have a dragon, and two, she's too young, and she's entrusted to look after the princes. But then also, they've said that apparently they're going to go over to Pentos as well, which is like, well, okay. Because he got a letter saying that he will, take them in, which I kind of think is just, switching one cage for another, in a sense. But I don't know.
I've heard theories because apparently they sent a letter to Pentos early in the season,
Yeah,
and Leonor went to Pentos in season one, Rhaenyra's first husband. So I've
he
heard people talk
did.
about whether or not he's coming back.
I thought he died.
Well, I think he dies in the book, but in the show, he left King's Landing because he was gonna. I don't know why.
Oh, that was it. Because him and Rhaenyra married for allegiance and stuff,
hmm
but they came up with a pact of like, we enjoy each other's, like, not each other's. We have anybody else's company they want, which is how Rhaenyra ends up being pregnant with not his kids.
hmm
Um, and that was most of like the tension in the beginning of like for like season one. So I think what happened, he eventually decided to run with his lover, and I might have to rewatch, even though I just rewatched the recap. I might have to rewatch season one, because I've got a feeling someone found him and killed him, because there was some things mentioned between Corlys and Rhaenys about their son and how he has to choose an heir, and I wanted to choose his granddaughter, but his
Well,
granddaughter said
I
no.
think Corlys and Rhaenys think he's dead. Like they faked his death, I believe, and then
Oh, it
he
could have
left and
been.
went to Pentos. I'm pretty sure that's what happened. So I think Rhaenyra and maybe Damon are like the only ones who know he's alive.
Yeah, it could be. It could actually. I think you're right on that. Because I remember something happening, and I was like, but yeah, no, you probably are right. So he could be still over there, which would be kind of nice if he could like shelter them. But again, you don't know how much influence and power he's got over in Pentos.
I also
So
don't know what that would do to the dynamics of like if he shows back up again because he was Rhaenyra's first husband.
yeah, well,
And
the thing is, I generally don't think he would, because I think he's happy with his lover and being free in Pentos, because it seems to me like people over in the free cities don't really give a shit who you lay with,
mm,
whereas in Westeros they do. because the thing with the book, it's somebody writing the historical ways. I can't think of the word, but you know what I mean. So there's a lot of nuance in the books. There's a lot of things that, whoever wins can paint, Rhaenyra, Alicent, women, which happens all through history, in a bad light. And they could just be putting this in the book. It probably isn't, but it could be something that people would do just to say, like, oh, look how bad she is because we don't agree with this. This is against religion. This is against our beliefs. We're going to put this in to make her look like even worse than what she was.
Mhm.
So there is that also going along. And I think, and this is where I find really interesting with House of the Dragon show is, are they insinuating it's like how it's written in the book, as if like there's a lot of nuance and it can be taken either way, or is this what they're taking as a factual retelling, which would be interesting. Because I kind of
Mhm.
prefer it to be how it is in the book, where you can take how you want to take it and sort of take it with a grain of salt, thinking like, the winners write the histories and they're going to paint the losers in a bad light. So like, was like Maegor really as bad as he was, and all of this stuff? Is Daemon really as bad as he is, or is he just really ruthless to people he considers his enemies, and people just take that a step further? Like, that's where, but I don't know how you bring that through on the screen. That's the only thing.
Mhm.
Whereas you
Yeah.
can bring it through on page, but that's what I find really interesting about all of this. Um, but yeah, I think
Yeah,
that
I think it's a lot harder to do that on screen than it is in a book. And
yeah,
I have heard people talk about how hard it is to adapt House of the Dragon or Fire and Blood because of there are some things that are ambiguous. There are characters that like completely disappear for years at a time and reappear and like we don't know what they were doing and you know so there could be like things that are just hard to adapt exactly and they have to take
yeah,
liberties or like fill in the gaps of the story or decide which way it's going to,
yeah.
you know.
There is definitely a lot of gaps because there would be something kind of like what passed between these two characters we don't know because that happened when it was those two alone. So they're taking on account of what people said, and it's like a lot of Chinese whispers can happen, um, you know, all sorts of stuff that can kind of go. But I still think George has done a very good way of writing it, so it gives you enough with the idea that no matter what way you go, it kind of all kind of makes sense to then what will come later.
Mhm.
In this, it's I found it really interesting and actually quite compelling to read it, and I don't understand why some people struggle with it, but I still find it compelling. Like, it's obviously not like Game of Thrones because like each like section could be a whole book series on its own. How everything happens. So there is like a lot going on, but I don't know. It'd be interesting. But
I'm interested to see what I'll think of it when I read it.
yeah, well, I think it's definitely a book for the fans. I would
Mhm.
start with that, unless you're used to that kind of like style of writing. Like the Grace of Kings is a little bit different, but I class it similar in how it's written. Like only the Grace of Kings, and from then on, it's a bit different. But
Mhm.
some people kind of complain because it comes across more like a textbook telling. There is more to it than that, but it's very short and sharp because it's going through a massive amount of time in a short space of like page count. So I think like in Grace of Kings, decades go past, whereas in Fire and Blood, it's centuries.
Yeah, yeah.
Because the House of the Dragon is 137 years after the conquest.
Mhm.
So there's all that going on. But I still find it very. I still recommend it. It's definitely interesting, especially if you're into House of the Dragon. It's interesting to see how that ends up.
Well, and I think it would probably even be more interesting to read after House of the Dragon just to see, you know, what the history books of Westeros said, you know?
Yeah. Well, honestly, it's making every time I watch an episode, I'm like, I'm gonna go back to Fire and Blood
Yeah.
because like, I want to know. And now I'm like on the actual point. Because especially like what I found was really interesting was King Jaehaerys's reign, which was before House of the Dragon, and then it was his succession that brought on the succession war, that brought on, you know, Descent, and then from then on it kind of went, and stuff like that. So I found that it's just really interesting, and like how it's going through, and all of, it's just so good. So I'm just hooked. I wanted to stay
Yeah.
home and read, but I had to go to work.
Unfortunately, life gets in the way.
It does. I was tempted to go because I was had to get there early to work some horses. I was like, oh, maybe I'll just do it tomorrow. And I was like, no, do it today. I was like, oh. So, but I think, has that covered everything?
I think so. I was just gonna say, I think that's a good place to conclude this episode.
Yeah.
I will have all of our other chats linked if you want to see those, and I hope to see you in another video. Happy reading!